A lot of times it is converging factors. Genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger.
Tell us a little bit about the risk of eating disorders.
So they can be very dangerous. Ends up affecting the person in so many different ways. It affects them physically, medically, mentally, emotionally.
You've tuned into Leaders with a Mission. I am Diana Castro, and if you or someone you love is struggling with self-body image or eating disorders, this show is for you. Allow me to introduce you to someone really special. Her name is Dr. Jenn Nardozzi, and let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Jenn Nardozzi is a dedicated expert who has spent over 2 decades empowering men and women to transform their relationships with food and their bodies. And today, she's gonna come and talk to us about just that. Hello, Dr. Jenn.
Hi, Diana.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me today.
No, thank you for giving yourself the space to be able to share with us this meaningful conversation. And just so that people get to know a little bit more about you, would you please share with us what inspired you to work with this particular set of disorder and this particular loving humans that you get to impact?
So I'm going to go back a few years, and it really was when I was starting to work with kids. I was in my 20s at that point, and I was working with children who had all kinds of mental health problems and behavioral problems. And I have to say, I not only worked with these kids, but it was the kind of place where you stayed and lived with them for a period of time. And I absolutely fell in love with the work, but I was like, oh my gosh, I need more education. So that's when I made the decision. I want to go on. I want to get my doctorate in psychology. And I will say, even at that point, I was interested in this area of eating disorders and food and body issues, but I still didn't know that that was going to be my specialty. And when I came out of graduate school and I was looking for jobs, I interviewed at this amazing treatment center for eating disorders. And it turns out it was like the first one in the country. And I had an amazing boss and so many beautiful mentors, leaders who really taught me so much, right? Like graduate school and education only gets you so far, but where you really learn about this work is by doing it and having incredible people who are also teaching you and affirming you. And I really fell in love with this specialty because it was so rewarding, but at the same time, so challenging to work with people who were struggling in this way.
Wow, that is very interesting. Thank you for that. And I wonder, is everybody thinks about like eating disorders. Is it really dangerous to have an eating disorder, or is just something that people can just go by without treatment? Like, tell us a little bit about the risk of eating disorders. Let's start with there.
So they can be very dangerous, right? Because these eating disorders, a really diagnosable eating disorder, it ends up affecting the person in so many different ways, right? It affects them physically, medically, mentally, emotionally. It affects their functioning in their lives. So it really can be so consuming of every single aspect of the person's life. And there are some statistics out there that, particularly with certain eating disorders, that particularly ones where people are restricting anorexia, that it really does have one of the highest mortality rates of any mental health disorder. So they can be very dangerous. And also in my experience, I don't really see that people get better without getting proper treatment, especially if they're really meeting like diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder. And the good news is that people don't have to struggle by themselves or alone or not get the help that they really deserve, because there is now help out there, from really trained people who are specializing in this area. So our recommendation usually is that you get holistic services, right? So you're working with your medical doctor, a nutritionist, a therapist who really knows how to treat these problems.
Wow. As a mom of 3 girls, I could totally feel how social media has kind of regurgitated. I don't know, am I saying it right?
Like regurgitated?
Regurgitated this problem in a way where kids are under the impression, if they don't have the right support, that they have to look and be a certain way. And do you have the same opinion? Do you think that having access to a lot of this information where kids are consuming all of these ideas or ideals of body types and like getting bullied in schools, and has this exponentially speeded up the problem? Like, are people born with the disease, or do they get it on the process?
Yeah.
Can you tell me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of times it is converging factors, right? Like if you look at any of the research, can be a genetic predisposition if there is eating disorders or sometimes even substance abuse in the family. So there can be like a genetic predisposition. So I've heard it said that it's like genetics loads the gun and environment pulls the trigger. So that can kind of be what is some like an analogy with eating disorders as well. And then our environment kind of creates this environment that can be ripe for somebody really struggling with an eating disorder. And now you mentioned social media. So now there's just more messages and ways we're inundated with, like, what are kids looking at? They're looking at sometimes models. They're looking at, the latest beach body. We're coming into summer. So there's all these messages that they're inundated with how they should look or the latest diet. I mean, look, there's some other positive messages on social media too.
Yes,
thank goodness. But there's so many negatives. So sometimes even my clients, they're like, Dr. Jenn, when I'm looking at my social media, I'm just noticing I'm starting to feel so bad about myself, right? And I start looking at this and I'm like, I'm starting to feel down. I'm starting to feel anxious. I don't want to eat my next meal. So we really have to talk with them about like being good consumers of media. And actually, I was just having that conversation like a day ago, right? It's like, at what point are you scrolling that this is fun? And at what point are you noticing within yourself, like, I'm not feeling good anymore. I'm starting to compare myself and feel sad and feel kind of down. So it's something we oftentimes are talking to our clients in the FAB program.
Wow. Let me ask you, what is the entry gate of this disorder? Is it the media, which we just talked about? It could be, but is there any other entry gateway for people to innocently start like flirting with it?
Yeah. I will say the story that I hear so much from clients is dieting.
Really?
Right? Yeah. So I'm not saying every single client, but a large percentage of people will say, oh, but Dr. Jenn, I was just like, I wanted to lose a few pounds. So I started this diet, or I started going to the gym. And that became sort of an entry point that the diet goes really awry. Yeah. And it starts getting out of control. So what started off as like, oh, I'm going to be quote unquote healthier, and maybe like, oh, I'm going to watch, the sweets I'm eating, or it really took more of a turn. And then what ends up happening is the person can start getting very obsessed, right? Whether it's obsessed with the food, or for some people, not everybody, it could be obsessed with the exercise. And the other part is many times when you ask people about this, when it started going in this really negative way, usually there is some kind of stressor or pain point, some kind of precipitant that had it sort of take
a wrong
turn.
Yikes.
Right. So, some people talk about this as like the perfect storm. Right? So you have this environment where we're already a little obsessed over
off balance.
Right? Off balance. And then there's some kind of stressor that happens. Maybe you were already dabbling in some of this, and then it's just sort of a setup to like kind of go down this kind of darker road. And sometimes it's not easy to find your way back.
So let me ask you, what are some signs, let's say parents, people that I
Yeah.
relate to, what are some early signs that some parents could be like, oof, this doesn't sit right? Like, what would you say are some things that really parents could be aware or awaken to?
Yeah.
And what can they do about it?
Yeah, those are great questions, because usually it's the loved ones who see it first, right? Because part of having this eating disorder is there is some level of like distortion, disconnection, sometimes some level of denial. So your question's such a good one. Like, what can parents, loved ones, what do they start noticing? Actually, I was just meeting with a mom this morning, and thank God she was able to catch things quickly with her daughter. And what she said she started noticing is she started noticing her kid was starting to like restrict certain things in her meal plan, right? Like, so at breakfast, instead of eating the fruit and the protein and the carb, she was starting to not eat the carbohydrate. Like, she just wanted to eat the fruit. And then, the next meal, maybe at dinner, like they were a family who would eat rice. We're in Miami, right? And the little girl was like, I don't want to have the rice. So she was like starting to cut out some of her food. Then the mom said, and these are kind of common things, right?
Yeah, but I don't see, I could see innocently, like, for me, that's not like a big red flag.
Right.
Unless it's like obsessive or you
Yeah.
see like a body. To me, but that's why I'm asking you, the
Yeah.
expert. So continue, sorry.
Because look, it's where there's smoke, there's fire. You don't want to wait till there's the fire.
Got it.
Right. So even though these things, like you're saying, well, hey, Dr. Jenn, how big of a deal is it? Like, oh, she's not eating her carb. But that's usually the thing people want to start letting go of, right? The carbs, the sweets, the fats, right? Like, so you're starting to pay attention. Are the patterns of the eating differently? The other thing you want to pay attention to is the mood. Like, just using this mom as an example, she said, my daughter was invited to a sleepover. They're teenagers. What do teenagers order at a sleepover? Pizza. And she was in her head about the pizza. Like, oh my gosh, I ate the pizza. Did I eat too much pizza? How's the pizza going to affect me? She's like, oh my gosh, this isn't my kid. My kid wasn't obsessing over that. And so it was really it was affecting her functioning, like in the sense of, was she having fun at the party? No, she was in her head, like counting the calories, worried about how this was going to affect her. And it really impacted like her ability to enjoy her friends and enjoy her life. So I think the other thing you want to start paying attention to are like, if it's your child, how's your child's mood? Are you starting to notice it's like they're worrying a little bit more? And this is where I think you get to have the conversations, right? Because you said, and what can we do? Well, I think having, like we were talking about this before the interview, like having these really honest heart-to-heart conversations about, hey, like, I'm noticing this. And I think if you can come from questions, being more curious, like, I see you and I'm wondering what's going on. Not coming from like
accusation.
No, not accusation or way too much anxiety, because, then the person's reaction is going to
defensive.
Right, defensive, or I'm going to minimize it. It's no big deal, or mom, you're making too much out of this. So, but I think it's coming from curiosity is important. What else can you do as a parent? Well, along with the conversations, I think being mindful of also like the messages you're saying about food, about body, about your body, about other people's bodies. Sometimes like we're saying these things so seemingly innocent, right? But how is that affecting the young people in our lives when we're making comments? And it's very common. It's common to like, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have eaten that. Oh, I'm trying to be good. Oh, like these comments. And, how is this affecting our children to whatever degree it is? So like, I think being mindful too of like, what's our relationship to food? What's our relationship to body? And being very mindful and honest too, right? If like we're struggling with something, depending on the kid's age, but I think there's a place to really have more authentic conversations about these things. So that would be something else. And then if you are really feeling like concerned, I think the next step would be find some good practitioners. And a good place to start would be a medical doctor. Like, hey, I just want to make sure my kid's okay. But I really would say try to see if you can find like that practitioner who has a specialty in this area, because I've also had feedback from clients and families where sometimes the doctor even misses it because it's not their training, it's not their specialty. So they're like, oh, it's not that bad, or they'll minimize something because they don't really know. It's not their training.
Got it. So are there other external signs? Like, let's say that, usual American life is like parents, if they don't have the culture of eating together, if everybody's on their own, what are other physical signs that parents could be attentive to? Because if they're not in the day-to-day, like, do their hair falls out? Do they fall asleep too much? Don't sleep? Like, is there anything additional that maybe that could be something to be present to?
Yeah. So that's a great question. So something else, because you are right. Like I can remember when the kiddo in my life started driving, right? As soon as she got her driver's license, it was like, oh, we're not seeing her for dinners as much. We're not eating with her quite as much as we were. And we were such sticklers to like sit down and we're going to eat the meal. And then it was like, oh my gosh, like these kids
We're not giving kids cars anymore.
Right? Kids are really busy these days. So that is something. It's like, can you incorporate at least some family meals? Maybe it's not every single day, like the way I grew up, like every day we were eating as a family, right? Probably maybe you too.
Yeah, the culture in our house is like
same thing, Italian background. Like it was like on the dot, we're eating when my dad's and we're sitting down, but it was a good structure. So some parents
don't have that.
They don't have that. So I would say incorporate some of that.
Got it. Okay.
Even if it's on like weekends or Friday nights, like starting to notice and pay attention. I would also pay attention to any changes in the weight, because that can be a sign like, oh, like all of a sudden, like the weight is different, maybe one way or another, right? Because sometimes people are restricting and then it can lead to overeating. So like paying attention, are there any fluctuations? And that's where, again, having the medical doctor, like, okay, we're going to look at their vitals, we're going to take labs, like somebody who's really going to be looking at all of those things. I think energy can be one, right? Because if the person is not eating consistently, they may be feeling very tired, that they're not meeting like their energetic needs. So like, again, what are the changes? I think that's the thing. As a parent, if you're starting to notice something seems different, or maybe your kid is like, I don't want to eat with my parents. Like you're starting to notice the secrecy that's happening. It's like, right? And you heard that when you interviewed some of the people that we work with, right? Yes. Like, eating disorders thrive in the darkness. They thrive in the secrets.
Yes.
And people who are really dealing with an eating disorder, they get so good at being secretive. Like one wonderful teenager that I'm working with right now, who's now doing well, but in the beginning, she wasn't doing so well. And now that she's more motivated and has a good mindset for her treatment, she was like, okay, Dr. Jenn, I'm going to tell you the truth. I was feeding the food to the dog.
Wow.
And
you see the dog fat, right? The kid skinny,
and people and like her, and she has a great family, but they didn't know what was going on because she got so sneaky at it, right? Or she was like, "Oh, I would wipe my mouth and I put my rice in the napkin." And look, this would happen even at the treatment center where I worked, right? And this is 24-hour care, and sometimes the clients at the treatment center would get so sneaky. And the clients would come to us and be like, so-and-so is hiding their food. Now, staff is sitting there with them.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing to pay attention to. It's like, oh, are they spending a lot more time in the room, or they're not wanting to do meals, or they're not being quite as open or expressive as they were. So you're starting to notice as a parent, like, what are the changes? And what's hard to tease out is like, what's normal teenage behavior, because they do want to spend more time in their room, or they do want to spend more time with their friends. So
and they're like, for girls, they have their period, so sometimes they're grouchy because of their period. It's not like this is an eating disorder problem, but at least to be mindful of something. Like, at least like, here's, if your intuition as a mom or as a dad is telling you something, just be present and like,
exactly. Trust your parental gut. I say that to parents a lot. That's a really good point. And you're right. Like, I'm even thinking about the kiddo that lives with me. She was really grouchy today, and she was able to say like, I'm not feeling well and I have my period. And like, she was able to like articulate that, which is really good, and be expressive. But that is a really good tip for parents. Like, trust what you're feeling and don't step over it.
Got it. So then let's talk about treatments. What are the options for treatment?
So a place to start, like I said, would be a good medical doctor who could do a full medical workup and say, okay, like, let's notice from, and say it's your own pediatrician, well, now you have where they were and now where they are. So you have that data that's comparing, right? Maybe weight, maybe lab work. So you're getting some of the facts. A really good therapist, because look, these issues get played out on the food, on the exercise, but it typically is about a lot more on the inside. So that's where you do want a good therapist who knows these eating issues, like that has some training, some experience working with eating disorders. And then the other person is a really great nutritionist. Again, not any nutritionist, but a nutritionist who really has some training and experience with eating disorders. Like the nutritionist I work with, I mean, she's amazing. Like, she just knows that, she knows this area. She's able to talk to families and people, you know, young people and sometimes older people, about the science of food and the recommendations.
I heard you say like people would go to centers and they stay there. I know that that's not how you do it. Can you tell us about how you guys are different, and what can people expect when they work with someone like you?
Yeah, that's great. So, you know, like I said, I started off my career working in one of these centers, and people really, they got good results when they were there, right? Because it's like you're stopping all the rest of your life. You sort of, I don't want to say have to eat the food, but like, if you want to get out of the treatment center, you're just going to be extending your time there. So I would see people really progress when they were at the center. The tricky part would be when they left.
Got it.
Right? So when I stepped out, as I shared in my own private practice, I was working with most people who had eating disorders, men and women, and, you know, younger people too. And I wasn't seeing, sometimes some of the clients I was seeing, it's like they were still functioning well in other areas of their life. Maybe they were still doing well at school. Maybe they had friends, but the eating was, you know, the eating disorder was really difficult. So it was like, I don't want to have them go to a center if they don't need that level. Some people need that level, and thank God we do have treatment centers. But some people were like, they needed more, and there wasn't so many options. So that's where I sort of came up with what I call, our program is called FAB, that there must be a way to work with somebody where you have this amazing team that's really trained and specializes in these eating disorders with a step-by-step process. And where we want them to practice is in their lives, right? Like I talked about the young kid going on the sleepover, right? It's like we want them to have these like real life experiences and to be able to practice and say like what worked, what didn't work, and come back and tell the team. So the way that I think of it, Diana, is like we wrap the services around them in their environment, right? In their school environment or, you know, their college environment. And so we are able to be very flexible in that sense, like to work with.
To accommodate.
Exactly. To accommodate the different schedules. And then it's like they're not having, just as long as they're medically stable, they're not having to leave their lives.
Wow. Awesome. Mm-hmm. So thank you for all that information. That was so good. Now, let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Everyone who comes to the show, This show is called Leaders with a Mission. We discover your mission. We know what you're so passionate about. But I wonder in my heart, what is your personal definition of leadership?
So there's a quote I've really lived by, and the quote is like, a teacher teaches his or her own consciousness. And so I would put leader in there. A leader really teaches their own consciousness, because I don't think we can lead if we haven't done our own work, or we're not going to lead very effectively. So my definition of being a leader is really like you're living what you're teaching. And that comes to like my team that I'm working with, that comes from our clients. Like, we're always as a team doing the work that we're asking our clients to do. That's why I have more than one coach and my own therapist. Like, I have my own providers. Our team also has a coach. So we're always making sure like we're doing this work. We're growing our own consciousness, because how do you teach anybody anything if you haven't walked that path?
Dr. Jenn.
Yeah.
So every leader is a reader. What books? How do you feed your soul, your mind? What are you reading? What are you getting yourself into?
This is a good question. I will say a pivotal book for me is a book called The Power of Now. It's not like a super new book, but it is a book that I will go back to. And I'm not somebody, I'm like, gosh, there's so many books out there. Why would I read one again? But that is a book that I have over the years gone back to. I've reread. I'll go back to certain parts. I've recommended it because, again, it goes to that definition about growing ourselves from the inside out. And that really is the work that I do. It's inside first. So Power of Now. The other like teachers that I follow a lot, and I've read, they have a lot of books, is Jerry and Esther Hicks. And I am very into that work. And it's interesting because I knew about them and their work and their books for years, and I never felt called to it. And then actually a former client came to see me, and she was so insistent on seeing me. And she was like, Dr. Jenn, you got to study this. And I was like, whoa. And she was like a different human being.
Wow.
And I was like, well, I'm curious, because she was like on a whole different level.
What did they do to you?
It was like that. I mean, she looked different, but it was really her energy. And I was like, I have to see what this is really all about, even though I knew it here. So those are, I think, some people that also, they have so many books, Ask and It Is Given. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. So let us know, where can we find you? Where can people learn more about you, about what you're doing? Tell our audience.
Yeah. So they could find us at fabprogram.com, our website. My cell phone is on there. My personal cell phone is literally on there, and people can text me, set up a consult. We have it's probably less than a 2-minute quiz you can take if you're like, I don't know, where do I fall on this spectrum? And then they can set up a free consultation with me, and I'm happy to talk it out. What I always say to people, for some people, it's like they're going to work with me, they're going to work with my team. For other people, I'm the stepping stone to get them to their next spot. And I really, truly believe that. Like, when people come into my space, there's a reason for that, whether it's the personal or I'm just guiding them to their next step. So I'm happy to be a resource for people as well.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, for the humans that you lead, that are amazing, beautiful people that live with purpose and intention. And I could not recommend you more, because I know that you lead with love and you lead with integrity. So thankful for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Un besito. All right. So if you know someone who may need support in this area, you know who to go to. And for those of you who are looking to amplify your visibility and your mission with the power of video, visit us at forproductions.com, and we'll see you in the next one. Adios.